Hello, everyone. My name is Jan Miles. I'm a longtime captain with the Pride of Baltimore project. I'm sitting aboard the deck of the Pride right now. And as a lot of you know, and are personally affected by with this global pandemic, your vessels are tied up. Um, they're idle when they would normally be running their programs. So Pride of Baltimore II is under winter cover, has been since mid-June. And so this is what we do to her every winter. Right now, on this day, it's a pretty comfortable 70s, and we're getting ready for winter, and we're getting ready for next year. So Pride of Baltimore, the mission got started a long time ago through an amorphous change of unexpected expansion of original plans back in the 70s. First, it's a city building a boat to mark a history of the past, using that history of the past for a renaissance of the city in an area of the city we all know as the Inner Harbor. And that build a vessel, have it on display. It was iconic to the 1812 war success, and a war declared by the United States, resulting in a blockade of the East Coast. And fast boats were needed, very fast boats, the fastest you could find. And it turns out that Chesapeake Bay boats, which had been plying a trade into the Caribbean as well as elsewhere, were amazingly fast for their day. And they were iconic in the sense of their appearance. A lot of rake angling after the masts. And so this is our story. So go ahead, Patrick, get the slideshow going and let's get started. So art of the period. Here's an example. You get the imaginative extremity displayed here. Go ahead, Pat. So these vessels from afar were very recognizable, and they were recognizable as Baltimore built. Go ahead. And what is iconic about the rig disguises where the real speed is. And if you examine the Chesapeake Bay as a large estuary with a lot of boat traffic for the day, but a long reason for getting up and down the bay with freight from farms and town to town, small towns to big towns, there's a great deal of narrow water. And so carrying freight when you needed to tack, turn tightly, even in a wear ship situation or a jibe situation, you were benefited by a vessel that could do this fairly quickly. And so hull form was being affected. Traditional European hull form, and don't forget, the United States is founded by Europeans coming across the Atlantic, and in the period, these vessels were pretty full shaped. You wanted a lot of buoyancy. Go ahead, Patrick. Oh, I got out of order here. So the development of Baltimore, you went too fast, Patrick. Let's back up. Let's enjoy the slide. Okay, there we go. So you have Baltimore, some early days. This is sort of mid 1800s. Lot of traffic. The city became the third biggest city in the United States as early as the late 1700s. Go ahead, Patrick. And as I was mentioning earlier, hull form. You get on the right what was pretty common even in relatively small vessels. And then on the left, you get the Baltimore built, which is more sharp by comparison. Go ahead, Patrick. And then from a profile, you get a situation where notice how the spine of the vessel, known as the keel, is shallower forward and deeper aft in the Baltimore built boat and dead horizontal in the other vessel. So the lower vessel profile is not going to turn quickly. It's going to turn, but it's just not going to turn quickly. By comparison, the drag or the angle of the keel, along with the fact that from a deck length point of view versus a water length point of view versus a keel length point of view, the vessel's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. The upper vessel is getting shorter, whereas the lower vessel is more or less square. So there's a lot of attributes going on underneath the water for making the upper vessel surprisingly speedy by comparison to any vessel its own size that was built like the lower boat. But that's why these Baltimore-built boats could stay away from the Royal Navy pretty effectively, because in moderate air, the Baltimore-built boats were very quick. And that's true for all smaller boats that are sharp-built. But for some reason, the Baltimore-built boats did a much more effective job of privateering in the 1812 war. Something like 40% of captures were done by Baltimore boats versus the entire span of different designs that were sharp and fast from all around the country of the day. Go ahead, Patrick. So back to Baltimore. Over the years, mechanical power came in, and so freight was being moved by mechanical propulsion. The inner harbor had a lot of docks, some warehousing, everything made of wood except for the machinery. Go ahead. So all that went the way of the dodo bird. You know, the ships got bigger. They were being made out of metal. The harbor, the commercial harbor, was moving further out of the inner city area, the inner harbor area. And so the wood buildings, the ships were gone, the docks, the wood buildings were decrepit. So they were being pulled out and left with a big question mark. What do we do with this property? Go ahead. So jumping to the mid-70s, Baltimore realized that from a marketing point of view, to share with local residents and Maryland residents the fascination that is still present in their harbor, their city, with history, is the build another Baltimore boat, build another Baltimore schooner, the iconic Baltimore Clipper privateer. So that was started on contract with the city in 1976, and this year, 1976. Now, the inner harbor has been cleared out, except for a really new, tall building you see in the background. Everything was still sort of blank around the harbor, just a place to walk and to drive around, and high traffic in the inner city, and the city center was just passing by, busy getting from one place to the other. So this was on view for the visiting tall ships of 1976, after the 76 4th of July. And so foreigners that were sailing into Baltimore after 4th of July 1976 were asking the question, is this going to be your ambassador? The original plan was this was going to just sit static, floating in the harbor. And so go ahead, Patrick. And so there, we're going to do more than just sit static. We're going to go sailing. And you can see the commercial aspects of this city harbor in 1977. This she didn't start sailing, wasn't completed until 77. So you can see the old commercialism with the new business district in the background. Go ahead. And of course, hearts and minds were really affected. Look at that image. It's people were astonished. Even when they knew about these vessels, were well read about these vessels, people were astonished. And so the city took that and started going afield, and after 3 years of operation, turned the boat over to a nonprofit formed newly, especially to maximize this icon, this attractive vision from the years ago in Baltimore and the Chesapeake Bay, a purely Chesapeake Bay development, maximized out of the city of Baltimore, the harbor, the shipyards out of Fells Point. So make Baltimore known to everybody. And so that's what Pride of Baltimore Incorporated started to do, starting in 1980 through the first half of the 80s. Go ahead. And one of the grand earlier adventures after being around the East Coast and the Great Lakes in 1983, there was this rendezvous in San Francisco with those who'll recognize the white vessel as the Wanderbird of the day, but actually the German pilot vessel, Held Number 5, back in Germany now. And so quite a rendezvous sail we did. A sailing company went out past the Golden Gate of San Francisco, which is what you see there, the bridge, towards the Pacific, and then turn around, come back in again, and sail around between Oakland and San Francisco before returning to Sausalito. A pretty extreme example of differences: the good, the bad, the ugly. You can choose which one you want to be, the good or the bad or the ugly. Go ahead. So then the first Pride went off to Europe in 1985. And one of the icon images, of course, Gibraltar. She went to London first, through Ireland, actually through the Azores in Ireland, and then on through London, and then into the Baltic through Norway and Denmark and Sweden, down to Poland, and then around back in the day when Poland was still part of the Soviet Union, then into Germany, and then down through Portugal and Spain, and then finally wintered in the winter of 85, 86 in southern Spain in the Mediterranean, and then was returning home from there in 1986 when she was tragically lost in a very sudden weather event, very localized weather event called a microburst that was a cloud structure with a lot of vertical activity that was buried in a 100% cloud cover ceiling, low deck ceiling, so there was no visual warning. And in the middle of one day, this 70 knots or better struck, boom. She was reefed down. She had a double reef mainsail and a staysail. No other sails were up, and she capsized, sank. 8 survivors out of 12. We lost the captain and 3 others. So go ahead, Patrick. But the decision was made by Marylanders to replace her. It was a big petition in a sense of comment, regular, raising the question over a period of the 2 months, 3 months after the loss of the boat. Of course, there's going to be a great deal of anguish with the loss of the vessel. There was a hearing with the Coast Guard about the surroundings and the experiences, the testimony heard from the survivors and others that built the vessel and designed the vessel. And so notwithstanding all of this angst and disappointment, there was a constant notification by many from around the world, and certainly the country and the state and in the city, replace the boat. That was the recommendation. That was the sentiment, along with all the commiseration for the tragedy. So there she is, April 30, Pride of Baltimore II in 1988. Go ahead. So there's a little bit of difference between the vessel. The most fundamental difference is the displacement. If you can see the displacement, we go from 121 long tons, which is 2,240 pounds, to all the way up to 185 and better. So the sail area is not a lot different, a bit different, but not a lot. A variety of other lengths, dimensions are a bit different. The beam, of course, changes quite a bit from 23 to 26. But in general, the biggest change was it's a bigger boat under all that canvas. And so that was the main change. The other changes were she was conceived, the second vessel was conceived to meet passenger carrying regulations for the ability to have her earn her keep to some degree. contribute to her own keep. You can't do that with more than 6 people on a vessel this size paying. So if you want to have more than 6, you need to go through regulations. And so while the boat was built in the style of the day, she was built bigger than the first vessel, with an eye to ocean travel, long cruises of campaigning, celebrating Baltimore, celebrating Maryland, and introducing the same all over the place. That contributed to making her bigger, and then meet all the regulations. Go ahead. So we have her shortened down. It's hard to tell in this photo, but she's roughly at 12 to 15 degrees of heel, 10 anyway, and she's shortened down with a reef in the main, no square topsail, and she's going close to the wind, making between 5 and 7 knots, depending upon gusts. Go ahead, Patrick. Here we have her with square topsail and 4 lowers, and got a bone in her tooth, in a more moderate breeze, probably making 8 to 9, because she's not hard on the wind in this case. She's a little bit close reaching. Go ahead. So back in the day, these vessels were very low of freeboard, and they carried an amazing expanse of canvas when the wind direction relative to the ship direction was right. So this is downwind stuff. And look at all that cloth. It's hard to imagine, but they're going downwind. They can stand up to that until it gets to be blowing really hard. So then you're scrambling. Some of those sails require crew aloft to get down. Others would not. So go ahead, Patrick. And this is Pride of Baltimore II with as much sail as ever been designed for her. The ringtail is off the leech of the main. The stunsail, or studding sail as it's spelled, but pronounced stunsail, is off to the windward side of the lower square topsail. You got the top gallant, and of course the normal schooner stuff of the 4 lowers, mainsail, foresail, staysail, jib, and jib topsail. Everything is loose-footed forward of the mainsail. The mainsail is the only one with a boom on it, in the sense of the fore and aft sail. The ringtail is a pretty useless sail for us these days because the boat is such a good reaching machine. This ringtail, if the wind is going from the mainmast to the leech, the ringtail starts to flag or flop like a flag. Whereas the stunsail, the effectiveness of a stunsail is it's at the leading edge of the square topsail, so it's the first sail. So it doesn't cause mischief to the square topsail. So that's why studding sails are so effective within beam to broad reaching conditions. And the stronger the wind, of course, the more broad it has to be, more on the quarter. We've sailed Pride of Baltimore II in 25 to 30 knots of true wind. We're making 10, 11 knots, and we've had the stunsail on her because it's right on the quarter. Anyway, there you go. Let's go to the next slide. So, nomenclature. It gets to be confusing for some who are new to these schooner boats and these traditional types, but it's all pretty basic stuff. We don't use flying jib like the modern classics might, the yacht stuff. We use jib topsail because it hangs off the topmast. Go ahead, Patrick. Yeah, we're a little bit braced up. We're able to continue to fly the ringtail because the wind is still a bit far aft. It's not drafting off the main. The stunsail is okay because it's light air. It's really, really light air. We're not breaking anything with this. Go ahead. So here's a modern, contemporary. Well, we have an artist here who lives in Baltimore, and this is his reflections on a historical perception, looking back to history, to what life might have been like. That angle of heel is I don't think is representative of the period because the freeboard of those vessels would have been much less than Pride of Baltimore II. And so it's also, big boats are hard to manage for the crew because the angle of the deck. So it's a bit fanciful. That doesn't mean it isn't correct about the power. These vessels could be powered up tremendously. Go ahead. So here's a Pride of Baltimore II. We're off of Bermuda at the start of the 2009 International Tall Ship Race going to Charleston from Bermuda. It's a beam reach start. We've got quite a bit of wind. You can see by the wave action around the hull that she's going almost as fast as she could possibly go. We're not sharp braced, as I say, it's a reaching start. Go ahead. This is what it looked like the same time, the same day, the same instance. And if you're able to look closely at the folks on deck, they're not hanging on for dear life. The angle of heel was 12, 15 degrees. It looks horrifying from the other side, but in fact, it was really quite steady. No motion going on. We weren't carrying any water on deck at all. If you can see the person down midships ready to leeward, she's very comfortable right there, getting ready for another sail. So anyhow, those are the two contrasts. Back up one, Patrick. So there you go. It looks like she's probably dragging our lee bulwark in the water. Go ahead, forward. But nope. It's pretty sublime. Now, here we have a shot of her roaring in 2017 between Charleston and Bermuda going the other way. She's charging. We've got sail on deck, which is the top gallant. It's a sail, it's square top gallant. We set that on the fly, so that's taken and laid down on deck. It had been up, it's now down. And she's steady, making 10, 11, maybe 12 knots in certain surges, possibly more. Go ahead. So we often get the question about the rake, and the rake is a very complex story, and a lot of it is very subtle. There's claims that the rake is there for sharp bracing, but I can tell you that if you really got up there, the shrouds coming into the mast, they come in and surround the mast. They're just not that swept aft to help with bracing. The yard, the course yard, it's just not coming around. That takes different stuff. So maybe a half a degree to a degree of difference in terms of bracing without major contact, but it's just everything is, in terms of speed, is accredited to this extreme rake. And I say extreme because for holding the mast in place, the backstays, the shrouds are acting like backstays. You don't need that rake. Half of it, between say 4 and 6, is all you would want in terms of prevention from mast going forward, because that's what happens. Hull forms create drag, sail area creates thrust. There's going to be torque. There's going to be bending of mast going forward, so you have to stay the mast when you have a lot of sail area up and you really want to go fast. Your resistance increases, trying to push that shape through the water. So it's just prevention. That's what rake is about. You don't have to carry a lot of tension in the shrouds to hold that up. But back in the day, education being not as broadly shared as it has been in the modern era, people wouldn't understand where the speed's coming from. And they said, got to be the rake. Well, in fact, it's in the hull, that sharp-built hull. Of course, massive sail area helps, but it's all in the hull. Go ahead. So Pride of Baltimore II has gone a lot of places as far east as Russia and Ukraine, and as far west as East Asia, China, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. Been to the West Coast a couple of times, been to Hawaii a couple of times, and of course everywhere in between the span. So Maryland is known, the location of Maryland, more so the location of Baltimore. I can remember sailing in Europe in 1985 with the old Pride of Baltimore. Where is Baltimore? We don't have that experience anymore. The last time we were in Europe was in 2005. Nobody was asking us where Baltimore was. They knew it. So there's an impact with ambassador work. Go ahead. So places we've been, a little bit of a travel log. You've got Glacier Bay on the left. You've got Hawaii, one of the islands in Hawaii, Lanai, I think it is, Port of Lanai. And then just sailing off of Nova Scotia. This is the year 2000 coming into Halifax. A local caught that image. Go ahead. There we are off of Diamond Head there in Hawaii. To the right is Hong Kong. Brand new building there. Two different periods of time of being at the Tower Bridge in London. You got the old boat, 1985. Got the new boat. I can't remember what year. We've been there several times. Go ahead. So up in the Great Lakes, one of those iconic lighthouses of the man-made breakwaters to make things work for sheltering vessels. The lakes can get pretty wild with the wind up there. And then we've got New York City on the right. Go ahead. Here we are, 1990, Istanbul, going to Ukraine. Go ahead. So, what's our program? A lot of the traditional vessels, the historical vessels, they're running education programs. We're in the role of sharing who is Maryland, who is Baltimore. Please come do business with us. We're open for business. It's all about getting around. So we depend on volunteers when we're at home, when we can do maintenance under the winter cover. We're unable to use volunteers when we're sailing because we're restricted in our berthage down below, and we use 6 berths for those who come aboard as guest crew to sail. But there's plenty of work to do when we're at home in layup mode for those who are interested. Go ahead. And then, as I say, guest crew voyages, you come and be crew. You pay for the privilege. That helps float the boat, so to speak. And you're engaged with the actual handling of the vessel, shoulder to shoulder. We don't make anybody do anything they don't want to do. It's all about enjoying and learning and doing new things. So we don't force anybody anything other than to stand a watch and mind the safety protocols and know your safety gear. Go ahead. And of course, when it comes to showing off Baltimore, showing off Maryland, Maryland's best, Baltimore's best. You doll up the boat pretty big, really yacht-like. Go ahead. When it comes to education, we do involve ourselves as a service to the public for the support that the vessel and the company receives. We've got a couple of curriculum-based programs that are based on Maryland education curriculum, an 8th grade program talking about STEM and history that relates to that grade level. We also do a 4th grade as a Maryland history year, so we are available for that. We link up with other entities like Fort McHenry, where there's common busing of students, classrooms, and other institutions that have those relationships. My youngest years were influenced by my father's strong interest in recreational cruising. So not racing, but cruising. So I grew up with a lot of that in my background, dinghies and rowing and just being on overnight cruises at anchor or overnight underway. And my high school years were done in a lot of yacht delivery work. So I continued with that because I was not a very interested student. And so when I became pretty good as a crew member, it sort of seemed to be the path to go. So when I got licensed at 18 with the Coast Guard and I started to put my resume out there, I got involved with education on the water. And then the next iteration was as mate of the schooner Brilliant. And for 5 years, that broadened my horizon with historical craft, both the cruising classic yacht side of things as well as the commercial windjammer trade, that sail training trade was beginning to grow. And so that's where I got into this side of things, the more older rigs, less classic yachting rigs. And I've never looked back. So I've been very fortunate. I got invited to be a skipper for the first Pride as a temporary replacement to Assessor, who later died in the capsize. So that began my relationship. That what was supposed to be a short period of time became a pretty steady switching out with Armin Assessor, and also Peter Boudreau was invited back during the 80s from his time aboard the boat in the 70s. So the three of us, we shared operating the boat. And when the decision was made to make the second vessel, I continued on with the program. Well, borrow a phrase, God willing, the creek don't rise. We'll be crewing up, hiring crew between now and February, and crewing up with crew aboard come February. This winter cover, the up rig will go on for the next 5 weeks, and so mid-March is when we hope to go sailing again, particularly down to Annapolis, the capital of Maryland, where the General Assembly will still be in session. So we want to thank them for the support they gave us, and that will kick off some of the Chesapeake Bay activities around Maryland. But then get out maybe to Bermuda. There's some talk about partnering up with a couple of vessels, maybe more, to do a sail out to Bermuda in company, maybe a sort of a pickup race. We're talking about going into southern New England. We've got things to do at home. So back and forth and around. And then we hope that come a year and we're able to do all that and other vessels are able to go to work, we'll get back into the Great Chesapeake Bay Schooner Race, which was unable to sail actually this year, but will sail virtually this year. So we have hopes of an active season again next year.